So as we get into Spider-Verse here, what we're going to find is that we're going to encounter a wide array of different versions of Spider-Man. And in fact, it's going to be absolute pandemonium trying to keep track of them all. So in a lot of instances, you're going to hear me refer to individuals like this version of Spider-Man or things like that. Now with with Assassin Spider-Man, with Old Man Spider-Man, and especially with the Earth 616 version of Peter Parker, we'll address them as such. What we're going to do with the Earth 616 version of Spider-Man is we're going to address him as Peter Parker. That way we can really separate him from everybody else. But in addition, what I'd like you to remember is that while all of this is going on in the entire Spider-Verse conflict, while all these videos are taking place, the incursions are still happening. The New Avengers and the Cabal, led by Name of the Submariner, are still trying to end the incursions, and so the impending destruction of the Marvel Multiverse is still undergoing. And so just kind of keep that in the back of your head while all this is going on, because I feel like that would add this sense of a grander scale to the entire conflict that's taking place in the Marvel continuity at the moment. But what we do here as we start Spider-Verse is that we pick up with Peter Parker from Earth 449. And of course, this version of Peter Parker is woken up by J. Jonah Jameson in the same fashion that the Earth 616 version would, in the sense that when he answers the phone call from J. Jonah Jameson, Jameson is just screaming into his ear. And what this version of J. Jonah Jameson tells him is that there's some kind of a person who's wreaking havoc at Armstrong Park, and he wants Peter Parker to go photograph it. And so Peter Parker, as both Spider-Man and his normal self, working for what we would assume to be the Daily Bugle in this timeline, dons his outfit and goes to Armstrong Park. And when he gets there, he realizes that what's actually happening here is that Morlun is attacking the park. Now again, he doesn't really know who Morlun is. In fact, he asks who this person is, and Morlun responds by saying that every time he encounters a new version of Spider-Man, they always ask the same question: who are you and what do you want? And so what we see is that Morlun is easily able to overpower this version of Spider-Man, and this version of Spider-Man is killed and consumed. And so what we do is we jump to Earth 1, and what we find is that we pick up with Verna and Deimos, and of course they're the brother and sister of Morlun. But what they also do is they give us some really cool insight into the family life of the Inheritors, in the sense that there's trouble in paradise here. They don't really care for Morlun too much. Mostly it seems to be because they might be jealous of the fact that Morlun is considered the favorite by their father. But what happens is that after Morlun has feasted on Spider-Man from Earth 449, he comes back to Earth 1. And what they do is, of course, they greet him, they ask him which Spider-Man he had chosen to consume this time, and he says it doesn't really matter, that all the Earths are the same. Now what Verna does is she comments here, and she says that he should keep telling himself that. And this is really interesting, because what happens is Morlun begins to question this. Morlun begins to ask what it is that she's referring to. Now what happens is that Deimos tells Morlun that Verna, along with Deimos and everybody else, has been able to tell that the one reality that Morlun has been avoiding is Earth 616. Now Morlun initially tells Deimos that he's simply saving this universe for the last, but in truth, I would go as far as to speculate that this is not the case, that in fact Morlun is actually scared to go to the Earth 616 continuity to deal with that version of Spider-Man, because as we know, Spider-Man had defeated Morlun on a couple of occasions. And so because of this, I would surmise that Morlun really doesn't want to undergo the process of dying and being cloned to return against once more. And so what we do is we switch to the actual Earth 616 version of Spider-Man. And what happens is Spider-Man wakes up to Cindy Moon standing over him. And what Spider-Man does here, I guess what Peter Parker does here, is he gives us some really cool insight into Cindy Moon. But this is actually really interesting, the way that Marvel does this. In truth, I would go as far as to say this is probably a continuity error on behalf of Marvel. And the reason why is because what Peter Parker says is that Cindy Moon claims to have been bitten by the same spider as Peter Parker. But what we know here is that during the events of Original Sin, this was actually true. That the thing that Peter Parker had seen when the orb had blasted multiple superheroes with the secrets of the Watcher was that Peter Parker had learned that his spider had bitten somebody else. And so the fact that he would convey and say that Cindy Moon is claiming this would indicate that he doesn't believe that it's true, indicating that he doesn't know whether it's true or not. So again, just kind of something to keep in the back of your head. Again, this is something that's not, that really isn't something to go too deep into, I guess, but it really just highlights the kind of continuity errors that we had seen in Marvel Comics. But of course, what happens is that Cindy Moon and Peter Parker begin, I guess, talking with one another. And again, what we see is that the pheromones that are picked up, or I guess dispersed between the two of them, really begin to draw the two of them closer. And this is something that we had immediately picked up on during Original Sin, that as soon as Peter Parker had met Cindy Moon, he was immediately drawn to her in a way that he wasn't drawn to anybody else. And what they do is they really, I guess they begin to realize that for the most part, they have to find some way to get out of here, that they can't stay in the room of Peter Parker anymore. Otherwise, they will dive back into the very heated romantic and most likely sexual relationship they had previously had. And so what they do is they leave the apartment of Peter Parker and they head out into the city. And in the midst of traveling into the city, they come across a bank robbery. Now, what they do is, of course, they rob the bank, or I'm sorry, they stop the bank robbers and so on. But while the bank robbers are being stopped, we also see that Spider-Man is joined by a multitude of other versions of Spider-Man and Spider-Woman from different realities. Now, what happens is, of course, after the bank robbers are defeated, Spider-Man begins asking them what they're doing here and what's going on. And what they say is that the web of life is converging on Spider-Man. And Spider-Man doesn't really know why, he doesn't really understand what's going on here, but what the group tells him is that he's faced the Inheritors before and he's been successful in the sense that he had faced Morlun and he had won. Now, Spider-Man is a little shocked here to learn that Morlun is actually coming back, but what they tell him is that it's not Morlun who's coming, that it's actually Morlun's brother Deimos, that what they had found was that a portal or some form of transportation had been opened between the realm of Earth 1, where the Inheritors reside, and the Earth 616 universe. And so what they had done is they had followed this version of, or I guess the person of Deimos, to Earth 616 in order to warn and to save Spider-Man or Peter Parker from what was going on. And so what we do is we jump to Wundagore Mountain. Now, Wundagore Mountain is, of course, the home where the New Warriors are currently calling their home, although I guess at this point what Marvel tells us is that it's what's left of the New Warriors. And what we do is we pick up with Scarlet Spider. Now, Scarlet Spider is currently being attacked by Deimos, and what Deimos does is basically attempt to consume him, but before he's actually able to kill him, we see that Spider-Gwen shows up along with Old Man Spider and a couple other people. And what happens is that this group is able to save Scarlet Spider, but at the same time, Bruce Banner, who is an alternate version of Spider-Man from a different reality, is killed in the process. And so what the group does is they jump back to Earth 13. And the reason why they jump back to Earth 13 is because this is a safe haven for all of the Spider characters from the various realities. Now, again, Spider-Man is still very confused here. He still doesn't really know what's going on here. From his perspective, he suddenly just met up with all these different versions of himself, and they've simply gathered him and then taken him to a location while on the way saving somebody else. And so what he asks is, why is it that they're safe here? Why is this place a safe haven when nowhere else is? And what happens is that Cosmic Spider-Man appears. Now, what Cosmic Spider-Man tells Peter Parker is that this is a safe place because of his abilities. But what Peter Parker also deduces is that this is the version of what he would have been like had he not lost the Enigma Force. Now, the Enigma Force is the force that is possessed, as far as I understand, by Captain Universe. And in Spectacular Spider-Man, Peter Parker had been possessed by Captain Universe, and as a result, he had been able to wield the powers of the Enigma Force. This version of Peter Parker from Earth 13, this Cosmic Spider-Man, is what Peter Parker would have become had he not given up or lost possession of the Enigma Force along with Captain Universe. And so again, what Captain Universe says, or I'm sorry, what Cosmic Spider-Man says here is that because he is so powerful, the Inheritors would be foolish to attempt to conquer them or to attack them in that universe. And so what he says is that this is the safe haven. This is the one place where all the characters can go to be safe. But the problem here is that his powers only exist, or they only, I guess, exist in their current form of some measure of omnipotence as long as he's within his own reality. If he leaves this reality, he'll lose his powers and he will only have the powers of your regular Spider-Man. And so again, what we see this Cosmic Spider-Man saying is that if it becomes necessary, he will leave this reality, and that again, it most likely will due to the coming battle. Now again, what Spider-Man says here is that he's a little confused, continuing to really be overwhelmed here, and he asks them about what battle it is that they're talking about. And what Cosmic Spider-Man says is the reason why they've brought him here is because he is the best of them. But before we get too far into that, what we do here is we jump into Miles Morales, and while this is going on, we find that Verna has apparently arrived here to, I guess, attack Ultimate Spider-Man, Miles Morales, as well as Jessica Drew. And so what happens is that before they're actually able to commit this act, we see that Assassin Spider-Man along with Spider-Punk arrive, and they're able to rescue Miles Morales and Jessica Drew. But before Miles Morales leaves, what he does is he tells Verna that she has made this personal, that she has made this something that he simply, I guess, cannot walk away from, because what she's done is she's insulted the memory of Miles Morales' mother by destroying her tombstone. And so what we find is that Assassin Spider-Man and Spider-Punk take Miles Miles Morales and Jessica Drew back to the safe zone. And when we get back to the safe zone, we of course again see various versions of Spider-Man meeting up with each other. But what's also happening here is that Cindy Moon is conducting an experiment of her own. What Cindy Moon is basically doing here is she's walking around all these various versions of Spider-Man, of Peter Parker, as well as Spider-Woman, and she's trying to figure out if she can pick up and really has the same kind of attraction to them as she does to Peter Parker from the Earth 616 continuity. But what she finds is that she doesn't. Now again, this gives us some really valuable insight into the character of Cindy Moon and into how these various Spider-Men function within their own native reality, in the sense that much like the Infinity Gauntlet or the Infinity Gems, that they really seem to be at their peak in their own reality, but that these characters really tie into other characters from their native reality more so than they do the other characters. But again, we see that these this various group begins splitting into teams. They begin splitting up separately. Now, initially, Peter Parker from Earth 616 is paired with Cindy Moon and Gwen Stacy, but he says no. Now, Gwen Stacy is really, I guess, unsure. She doesn't really know why it is that Peter Parker doesn't want to be partnered with her. But of course, we know that the whole reason behind this is because Gwen Stacy was killed in Peter Parker's reality. And so I think that Peter Parker here is afraid that she may be killed again, and I would surmise he doesn't want to actually see her die a second time. And of course, we see that Peter Parker turns down having Cindy Moon on his team because of the attraction between the two of them would be more of a distraction than anything else. But of course, Cindy Moon stows away on the team anyway. And so what we do is we find that Peter Parker's team actually ends up in the Spider-Man 2099 universe. Now, this is a very interesting concept here, because what we find is that within this universe is Dr. Octopus as Superior Spider-Man, and this is basically a continuation of the team that he had put together in Edge of Spider-Verse. And what's really funny here is that we basically have two versions of Spider-Man from the same universe, from the same continuity, from Earth 616. And the whole reason why this had happened was really just as a way to introduce us to what it was that Dr. Octopus was doing during his time as Superior Spider-Man during the time gap here. And what he tells us is that for months he had been working on a device that would mask the signal or mask the scent of these various Spider-Men from the Inheritors. But the problem here is that there are basically too many of them here. But what he also says is that the scents of both Kane and Cindy Moon are much higher than anybody else, and he asks why this is the case. Now, what Old Man Spider says is that the reason for this is because they are unique to any reality. Cindy Moon is what's referred to as the bride, and Kane is referred to as the other. But before we're actually able to get too far into this explanation, before we learn too much more about this, we again see Dr. Octopus saying that they're going to inevitably draw the attention of the Inheritors because there's too many of them there, and then we see that Deimos arrives. And so what Deimos does is he begins attacking the various forms of Spider-Man, taking it in turn to do what he can to kill them all, because for him, he considers this some measure of a succulent feast. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, let me know, and I will catch you guys later. Peace. Be sure to follow me on Twitter. There you can keep up with all the updates from Comics Explained and talk to me directly.